grew up watching war movies, and it was like, this is what we joined for. It's all Hollywood until you get shot at. About 3 months in, we saw our first serious attack. And, I could die here. There was not a culture of tolerance for struggling with trauma. They didn't get any attention until things exploded. I'm standing in my parents' house, and I have blood on my boots still from a buddy of mine.
What does it take to rebuild a life? To rise from the ashes of addiction and rediscover purpose, meaning, and hope? I've walked that road myself. The principles that helped me recover didn't just save me, they reshaped how I live. Now I'm sitting down with guests from all walks of life to ask a bigger question. Could these same principles help anyone? Not just people battling addiction, but anyone who feels stuck, broken, or searching for something more. I'm Aaron Prager, and this is American Recovery. Josiah, thank you so much for coming by today. When I heard your story for the first time, I was hooked. It was actually on, I believe it was called the Street Gospel Podcast. Is that what it was?
Great podcast, yeah.
Great podcast, yeah, from a couple years ago. And at that point, we were like, we got to get this guy in here to talk about his story. So Just want to say thank you for coming by.
Thanks for having me.
We're on this journey to explore how spiritual principles can help people change their life around, how they can come from the bottom and level up, if you will. You know, and we've talked about in the past, unmanageability, accepting powerlessness in your life, which actually does give you power. And then being like, hey, we have to come to believe, at least be in a place where we can come to believe that something may be able to influence our lives in a positive way, to pull us out from that, which brings us to where we are today, which is making a decision. And so I wanted to, kind of talk to you about this this concept a little bit, but also afford you the opportunity to walk the viewer and us through, your life and early lifestyle. So what was early Josiah O'Neil like with his family?
Yeah, so kind of an odd difference, as you know, we've talked. I grew up not here. I grew up in Mexico and later in Ecuador because my parents were missionaries. So I was born here in the U.S., and when I was 3 months old, my parents moved to Mexico. And I actually graduated when I was 15. So
From high school?
From high school. So I was able to finish early and move back to the States, where I started going to a Bible college, actually. And then the war in Iraq kicked off. So that's where my story kind of bifurcates.
So your parents were missionaries, and I love to ask this because I was raised in a religious household too, but I like to ask people, what did your relationship with God look like at the beginning? Did your families, was it the same, conception, or what did that look like to you?
Yeah, so I think a lot of kids that grow up in homes where their parents are involved in ministry directly, like my dad was a pastor and a missionary, there is somewhat of a, they call them PKs, pastor kid syndrome, where we grew up, I think, sheltered from the effects of just how dark the world can be. So we have a really good root, a good foundation, but there's a process of coming into your own understanding and relationship. At least was the case for me. I think I was around 14 when I read a book. Specifically, I remember it was called In His Steps. And it's a book about a preacher, turn of the century, United States. And actually, most people will know, have you ever seen those bracelets that say WWJD, what would Jesus do? So that's kind of where that term came from. It's from this book. And this guy decided to take that phrase seriously. What would Jesus do? And he applies it. So for whatever reason, I remember reading that as a 14-year-old and thinking, okay, I just leveled up a little bit in my understanding, almost like I was a process of breaking away from my parents. Now, I say process because that's definitely not the end of the story, right? That's just the beginning. But it is important at some point in your life, especially if you grow up around the church or in ministries, you have to make it your own. You have to decide on your own that, this is what I believe and this is what I'm going to do. This is who I'm going to follow. And for me, that came later on, as we'll get into. But
So that was my next question, is has that changed or has that stayed the same from childhood in your conception? I know we'll talk about, you kind of moved away through other life experiences and it happened and you eventually had found your way back.
Once I joined the military, there was a long period of time where I wasn't walking with the Lord, I wasn't going to church, and I just kind of drifted. And I think really on the basis of not really understanding how serious the things that I was raised to know, practically applying them, there was a gap in my mind, I think. I think part of that in a positive sense, because I did have a great home life and I had wonderful parents. And so I don't think that I understood quite the warnings, let's call them, right? And the Bible talks about, what you should avoid and stay away from, and God's commandments for how you're to live. And I think there was a gap in my understanding of why those things were important, because I just took for granted. I had a wonderful life and had great parents, and I didn't understand how dark the world could be.
Well, I think that's a good, segue then to what did end up compelling you to join the military.
Long time family tradition. Both of my grandparents, my grandfathers were in the military during World War II. My dad served during Vietnam. I think I first started thinking about the military right around that same age, 14, 15. I knew I wanted to join.
Early on. Something I have to always ask people about this is because I can't comprehend it, I can fully admit this, is how do you mentally prepare yourself for combat like that?
I don't think you can. I think the U.S. military has processes that they've used for many years, which are effective, right? Training warriors and preparing people. But, the caveat is, it's all Hollywood until you get shot at, right? We grew up watching war movies and John Wayne, and it was like, this is what we joined for. We wanted to go do that. So we were in Kuwait for a little bit. Additional units are getting there. And to your question about preparing, I remember, at least the medics, right? They literally were having us watch like Black Hawk Down in a tent in
Really?
Kuwait. Remember the scene where the guy's dealing with the femoral artery? If you've seen the movie, right?
Yeah.
There's a negative tension on an artery, in the femoral. So when it gets severed, it retracts up into the muscle. So they had to do this venous cut down where they go above the knee and they cut in and try to clamp it. It doesn't work and the guy dies. I don't know, for whatever reason. I mean, we did a lot of training, right? But that sort of scenario in my brain sticks out of being in this like plastic tarp military tent in the desert, watching that scene from Black Hawk Down, thinking, this is what we're going to, and it just, reality is completely not set in at that point. It's just like a movie. You're just thinking, this is going to be like the movies we watched. You have no idea what's coming. So we make it into country, and we took over. You probably saw it. There's a famous like skyline shot. We called it the Pyramid Building. And then it was right next to the Tomahawk Building. And these were Ba'ath Party headquarter government buildings in downtown Baghdad. The Tomahawk Building was called that because of how many Tomahawk missiles hit the roof. So we nicknamed it the Tomahawk, and the Pyramid Building just looked like a pyramid, so that's what we called it that. We occupied that territory, and we started running missions out of there. About 3 months in is when we saw our first serious attack. So we had some little things here or there, but we had not lost anybody. Then one day, about 3 months in, we got three guys, Wallace, Fisher, and Dreyer. These are guys in my unit, right? They're in a Humvee, and we actually have a Georgian national from the country of Georgia riding in the back seat of the Hummer with them that day. They were doing like some co-mission together. And these guys get hit by an EFP. Well, we did not really know what the heck that was yet, right? They had these platter charges originally, which was like this big pancake device that would shoot out a bunch of shrapnel. The EFP, though, was based on a design that we used to pierce the hulls of ships back in World War II. It's a shape charge, right? So these explosively formed penetrators, EFPs, had a concave plate, and there's certain specifications that would go into it, but basically it was a pretty simple design. And the plate would bend forward into a point, kind of like a sabot round, ideally, right? And it's going at such a high velocity that it would just go through armor like butter. And, if you ever look at pictures, you could see the side of armor. It's got a nice, like just a perfect hole where it just melts through it like a needle. Well, then it comes out the other side and it fragments and just wrecks everything, right? Wow. Or sometimes it would come through in a big chunk. So Wallace, Fisher, and Dreyer, they're driving, their vehicle gets hit, and it's horrendous, right? The Georgian national loses his legs. He gets blown like 25 feet out the side. They find him on the street, literally 25 feet down the road. It's amazing that he's alive. He's still alive today. But Wallace, Fisher, and Dreyer, all three of them are killed. The gunner is, from what we know, is cut in half from the blast. Driver loses his arms and part of his face. The troop commander, the sergeant in the front seat, loses his head. And then the vehicle and the ammo and additional explosives in the truck, they catch fire, so they burn. So I remember, so I'm on a response. I'm not on the convoy with them, right? But we respond to recover the vehicle. And I don't know what we're going to see. So I go out with my aid bag and a pair of trauma shears. And we're trying to recover their bodies, right? But it's such a graphic scene. They've melted into the seats. So the next morning, something had changed, 100%. That next morning I thought, oh, I could die here. I could die here, right?
That was that was kind of a mental turning point for you.
Absolutely.
So how from then until you now, because I want to move from there, because thank you for sharing that story, by the way. It paints a very visceral picture, to be honest. But now moving from that point to you finding your faith and reconnecting, what was that like? How did you get from that point of, oh my God, like I can die here, to what does your relationship with God look like a few years down the road, after the military?
Yeah, well, I personally had to hit a bottom place where you realize your insufficiency, right? And this is where I think a lot of stories can kind of collide in similarity.
Absolutely.
That went on, for a long time. We were there for a year, and we continued to lose more guys, and it just got worse and worse and worse and worse until we ended up with the second highest casualty rate in the division. There was an infantry unit that had a little more, but we were pretty up there, right? So when I came home, there was no transition from this coming home. There was no care. I think I shared that, quick story. I was leaving Fob, Washington on a Chinook, a CH-47, while we were getting mortared. And within 2 days, I'm standing in the pantry of my parents' house in South Carolina, where they had moved. And I'm looking down at my boots, and I have blood on my boots still from a buddy of mine. There was no transition, right? So, yes, in the months and time that followed, I did what a lot of young guys came home to, was we just, you filled it with drinking and going out and being with other guys, right? And you could see immediately the effects of this. Some people did not handle it well, right? Guys were committing suicide when they came back. People had found, that their wives had left them while we were gone. People were getting divorced.
So people were seeking some sort of solution, but they didn't know how to go about it. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, they were drowning it in whatever circumstance or experience, I would say. I mean, I think in the absence of reality, in the absence of truth, and what I mean by that is God, if God represents reality, in the absence of that, you have to fill that space with whatever it is that numbs or takes away what you don't want to deal with. It's a great amount of denial, right? Mm-hmm. And so that looks different for different kinds of people.
So to be clear, were you yourself using alcohol to fill that void that was inside?
I don't think I thought of it that way. I think, but clearly that's what we were doing. Yeah. I think that was a culture anyways in the military of you go out and you drink on, Friday nights especially, but we got at the point where we were drinking in the morning because once we came back, the military's like, okay, get ready, we're going to deploy again. There's no end to that cycle, and I was fortunate in that, I did my time and I got out just in a basic contract, but there are many guys out there still today that went repeatedly over and over and over again. So
well, then what helped you actually then get from that point of unknowingly self-medicating to knowingly turning your life over to God?
Yeah,
making that decision.
So powerful circumstance. So I'm in an apartment, sleeping on a futon mattress. I'm not getting anywhere with what I'm doing in life. Unhappy with. For a while, I was working in an ambulance crew when I got back. And I have this sudden realization, not an audible voice, but I felt like God was speaking to me and saying, "This is it. You're gonna be a Christian or you're not gonna be a Christian. I'm getting too old. Like at some point, you have to make a decision. You have to put childish things behind you and become a man." And I had this really clear, unequivocal, you're either gonna do this or you're not gonna do it. And it was heavy for me because I had flirted that line because I had a foundation. And I was raised to know the truth. I knew that I wasn't living the way I should. I knew that, smoking a pack a day and drinking in the morning was not going to fulfill anything, right? And at some point I had to get off that wagon. And I had a desktop, giant desktop computer and a printer with holes on the side. And I went to the computer, and I don't recommend this because I don't think you should play Russian roulette with God, but I literally Googled something to the effect of, God, if you're there, I need you. I don't remember exactly what I said, but something to that effect. And the verse that popped up in the Google search was Daniel chapter 9, and it's specifically the part where the angel's responding to Daniel in the lion's den, where he's just feeling like there's no way out. These lions are going to kill me. I'm going to die. I'm in despair. And he's prayed out. He's cried out to God. And the angel shows up and says, Daniel, before you even asked, God heard your prayer and help was on the way. Dude, it just it really took me back. I read that, and I had grown up hearing these stories, right?
Yeah.
But hearing Daniel in the lion's den in Sunday school as a 7-year-old is a lot different than hearing Daniel in the lion's den as an adult who understands how dangerous lions are.
I also think it has to do a lot with, and I think this is relatable to everybody who's in this process of, in one way or another trying to fix their lives or get better or whatever. It's like, I remember for myself, because what you said, don't play Russian roulette with God. I've kind of call it sending out the spiritual bat signal in a way. It's like, and it's similar to put in a military term, a foxhole prayer. Mm-hmm. It's like, God, I haven't, been there. I haven't done it, but just please get me through this.
Yeah.
But then on the back end of that, isn't there action that has to take place?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
So
that was the beginning.
Yeah.
So then I had to make a choice, right? So I saw that. I actually printed it out and I stuck it to my door, and cold turkey overnight. I stopped smoking, stopped drinking at that time. Everything changed. All the people I was hanging around, I lost all the friends that I had at that time. Everything changed in my life because I knew that you have to make physical changes, right? Well-wishing is not going to change you. You have to take physical steps to take control and discipline yourself, right? Now, I did that through God's help in my life. I don't think I could have done it independently, and I say that because I look at people around me to this day who still have the same problems, and there's a lack of surrender. There's a lack of surrender to Christ where it's like, well, I can fix it myself. I can do it myself, right? Even guys going through programs I've seen up and then fall off, and then they're back on and they fall off. And it's like, there's never a full surrender. No one takes the place of the deity of self, right? And until you realize that you're not God, that you are accountable to someone, and that there is truth to be held, that Jesus loves you, and there is a path forward, there is reality to be grasped, and that you have a Father that cares about you. Well, you still have to surrender to that. You have to give it up, and then real change can happen. And man, it did for me big time.
So was that the moment when you Googled, when you as you called it, I love it, you played Russian roulette with God there.
Yeah.
When you Google searched, God, if you're there, help me out, was that your I can't run my life anymore moment, or was there something else in conjunction with that really said, hey, Josiah, I got to put the pedal to the metal, make a decision, and commit?
Yeah, no, I think that was me saying, I can't do this on my own. That was where I had all the equipment, I had the foundation, I was raised, I had all the knowledge, right? I would have, it's funny, I had a conversation one time when I was in the Army with a guy, because I had all this head knowledge from growing up on apologetics and how to defend, even intelligent design and evolution. I got into a conversation one time with this guy about evolution versus intelligent design. And we had this great combo, and then he finishes it and he goes, well, that's all great and dandy, but he's like, you're the reason I'm not a Christian. And I was like, what? It really caught me off guard. And he goes, yeah, because you talk about all this Bible stuff, but you're worse than I am. And that has stuck with me to this day, right? So it wasn't like there was a lack of knowledge. There was a lack of surrender. Yeah, you can, even the demons know that God exists, right? And they tremble. Having knowledge of something isn't enough. You have to put your trust in Him, right?
So going back to when you were in the throes of heavy drinking, to be clear, you never entered a specific recovery program, but seemed to use the principle of surrendering to God without knowing that it was a principle. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. Yeah. Because it turns out that all those programs are actually borrowing from something God said a long time ago. Yeah. That truth's been out there for a long time. It's not so much that the truth can't be found, it's that we didn't want to find it.
No, I love this. So I don't know if you've ever heard the 3 frogs on a log story?
I don't know. Maybe you can tell me.
It's kind of cheesy, but basically, in essence, it has to do with decision making versus action. 3 frogs have sat on a log. 2 frogs decide to jump in. How many frogs are on the log? 3. 2 only made the decision. There wasn't an action that followed.
Oh.
So it's kind of, like I said, it's kind of cheesy
like
and whatnot. But I know for myself, I have to be in my own recovery and in my life now, because recovery has changed me to the point where it's like now I get to the best of my ability, try to live in the sunlight of the Spirit and be there for my wife and child, and talk about accountabilities and responsibilities. I've learned that a lot of these things don't seem as insurmountable if I'm willing to let something into my life, to be faith-based and, as you said, come to trust, because that's the third part of the coin that a lot of people I think forget, is there's coming to believe that maybe something can help you. Then there's making that decision, but when does trust come into play? Mm-hmm. And that's where it becomes about action. And I think that's what you're touching upon now, is like you then began to take steps. Mm-hmm. But a question I got for you as it pertains to that is, when you're at this process now, and you've put this thing on your door, you put this saying on your door, it didn't just absolve you of all of the fears that came along with it, did it? What were you dealing with at the time?
Well, when it comes to like PTSD and like combat trauma specifically, I think that there was a great healing that occurred, and I would be lying to say that it didn't. So I don't want to skip over that.
Yeah.
I think that there is a literal physical renewal of the mind. When I became a Christian, I became a new creation in Christ. My mind, my soul, it's like you're a new person. I even had a guy come to my wedding not too long after this, who in his speech said that I was the last person he thought would be a Christian. I'm like, why are you doing that? Like, it's like my whole family's there and everything. But there was a physical change that occurred that I can't skip over, because it's true. And even guys that I've talked to that were deployed and stuff, they ask me, like, well, what is going on with you? A lot of guys are still having a really hard time. This is 20 plus years ago. And they talk about Baghdad like it happened last Friday. And there is a change that occurs. There is a renewal, right? Even David, the psalmist, wrote, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, renew a right spirit within me." This is not a new concept, right? God has a miraculous ability to create and make beauty from ashes, right? Mm-hmm. And so the application part, what you're saying, and the reason I chose to follow Jesus is because it wasn't that there was a lack of evidence or proof. To the contrary, the famous apologist G.K. Chesterton said, it's not that Christianity has been tried and found wanting, it's that it's been found wanting and left untried. It's demanding of people. It wants too much of you, specifically in surrender to yourself, right? Mm. It reminds me of when Jesus talked to the rich young ruler, and he had everything, wealth and money and fame, and he came to Jesus and he says, "Teacher, Rabbi, what must I do to follow you?" And he said, "Go home, sell everything you have, and follow me." Okay, this is not an endorsement of selling your physical things. It's that he was speaking to the heart and the character. He knew that young man did not want to give up what he had. And I think that with trauma, that's why I said I'm a talker. Don't hold on to it, right? It's very good to speak about it, to let it out, to let it go, to be honest with it. I talk with other vets and I tell my story. But practically speaking, I had to stop doing things that I was doing before. I changed my environment. I changed my friends group. I changed my daily routine, right? I got up and I read my Bible in the morning instead of going to the bottle of Captain Morgan's, right? There was physical changes that occurred that lead to real world consequences.
I remember, when I made this decision myself, I did have a bit of this, kind of like, God, please help me. I don't know what you are. I don't know where you are, but I need to seek your help right now. But if you could walk us through what a typical morning now looks like for you as it pertains to your relationship with the God of your understanding. How do you consciously turn your will over during the day? Do you have to consistently make that decision? Is it an ongoing thing,
100%.
Or is it a one and done?
No. Daily surrender, 100%. Your flesh is constantly trying to rule over you. And like Paul said, we see now dimly as in a mirror, but someday we'll be complete. There's a process of continual surrender. If you think that you can one and done, like, I'm going to church or I'm reading, I don't know what it's not going to work. There's a So typical morning. So this morning, for example, I woke up, I listened to a devotion, I listened to online, I share it. My wife has the same one. Okay, let's pause there. Having a good wife is priceless. It's invaluable, right? Men and women are equal in worth, but different in positions. We complement one another, your strengths, your weaknesses. You fill those gaps in each other. And having a woman that loves God draws me to that and encourages me. And then we share that together. So my typical morning, we always intake the word somehow in the morning, whether it's a devotion or just personal time reading.
The same one together.
Yeah, or at least share it. Yeah, and we talk about it, and I'll listen to it, and then we'll text each other, even if we're busy or I'm going somewhere. That's there's a lot of terrible things about technology, but one of the nice things is open communication is amazing. You can share stuff with one another, right? So we always try to do that. It's funny, we just finished leading a marriage group at our house. It was centered around the love and respect model, which is women want love, men need respect. We're pink and blue. We're different. We're equal, but we're different. And understanding that is very important. So bringing that under discipline is very important as well. If you don't have your home life under control, if you can't be a husband, you can't be a leader somewhere else, right?
So when things are going really well, then, and I would happen to agree with you, as my program tells me, I get a daily reprieve based on my spiritual conditioning, also known as one day at a time. But when your life is going really well, and I feel like this is where a lot of people get tripped up, is when life is going really well, do you have any safeguards, or what do you do to keep from falling back into taking your will back and giving back that decision that you made?
Yeah, you have to be on guard against that daily. Be careful lest you fall, right? I was just reading that the other day in 1 Corinthians. Paul is talking to the church, the early church, first century church in Corinth. Tons of problems right away, right? Because people are always people, no matter if it was 2,000 years ago or not. And he's telling them, be careful lest you fall, right? That you have to be on guard against thinking that you're just good and you're going to coast. Everybody has proclivities and struggles. You got to know those and you got to deal with them, right? Like it may be alcohol, it may be substance, it could be some other form of addiction. But you have to know yourself. Like, for example, right? The Bible does not explicitly endorse prohibit drinking of alcohol, right? You have Jesus turning water into wine. You have wine makes your heart glad. You have that there present. But there are people who struggle with that. So you need to be aware of that. And on an individual level, I'm not talking about corporate or denominational approach, but as an individual, you have to discipline your mind and your body. And you cannot do that alone. You have to have outside help. And for me, that's why we go to spend time in the Word every day. Because if I don't, I see the difference in one day in the way that I speak to my wife, right? A big one that convicted me this week, hit me pretty hard, is the phrase, your response is your responsibility. And I was like, because if I blow up at my wife or we have an argument, it doesn't matter. Our natural proclivity is to blame everybody else for our problems, right? And a lot of times we'll go to substance to fill those things. When really it's like your response is your responsibility. At the end of the day, you choose how you respond, how you speak, how you act. And so I choose not to do that alone because I have the Holy Spirit. I have the Word of God who tends to know more than I do. So
I love that you just said that, because that is literally when people ask me, they say, Aaron, what was your rock bottom? And I say, I looked around and I realized I had no one left to blame for my problems but me. That was my bottom. That was the ultimate bottom. And it's a far cry. It's like I look back now, it's like almost 10 years, but it's not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. I'm still very much able to have taken my will back and making these decisions and not living in the sunlight of the Spirit. There's a prayer that says, God, thy will, not mine, be done. But what does that look like to you in practice when you're facing like a big life decision, career change, which you've done a lot, in different spaces, getting married, moving. If there's some crises that come up, what does that look like? How do you maintain that mindset?
Well, I think that corporately, because I am married, we make decisions together, and that's very helpful. In Christianity, we talk of God's will in terms of there's His general will, His specific will, okay, and then there's sometimes the hardest answer for us to hear from God is wait, and you just don't know, right? And that just happens sometimes. I think in the absence of specific direction or will, we do His general will, right? We follow His commandments. We love as we were loved. We follow His precepts. So So when it comes to making decisions, yeah, we take it in prayer as husband and wife, and we don't do anything that violates God's moral code. But sometimes you don't have specific things, so you got to try things. You just got to knock on a couple doors and see if they answer. If the door's closed, guess what? It wasn't God's will.
Well, that's I think where people can get tripped up a lot of the time is, how do you distinguish between God's will and your will? How does that show up?
Well, that's discernment, right? And as a believer, I believe that the discernment comes through the Holy Spirit. As a Christian, that is what we believe. It helps us rightly divide truth from error, and we rely on that heavily. Now, what if it's innocuous, right? What if it's like, well, I'm deciding whether or not, we don't need to over-spiritualize everything, right? If you're deciding whether to get premium unleaded or unleaded, like just make a decision, you know what I mean? But I think that general will of God is revealed to us in scriptures. We have a moral code in God's law and his precepts that we can abide by, generally speaking. So I'm all about action, not inaction. I can't stand it. Like if you get stuck in the cycle of inaction where you're just like, I'm so worried about everything that I won't try anything. That's a really bad place to be, right? Because you end up burying your talents in the ground and then it's just wasted. I'd rather you go out and try to do stuff. And if it doesn't work, well, then you just found out it didn't work. Try something else, Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question exactly. But.
No, it does. I mean, I get, like, this is one of those things, I'm a big personal relationship with God guy. Like, my brother is Orthodox Jewish. He's very following Havalacha, following Jewish law, make his connection. My father is a little bit of different things, but mine is very personal. And, at least as the way it was explained to me is that when I came into, because I am in specifically substance use disorder recovery, is how do I discern my higher power from my lower power? And being my lower power, Satan, demons, addiction, whatever one wants to call it. And it was explained to me, they said, at least at the beginning, this was the tool that I was given. Your first thought is your lower power, your second thought is your higher power. Because you have a broken brain. And it's kind of like running on a broken leg to fix it. It's not going to work. You can't think your way into better action. You have to act your way into better thinking. And that was one of those lines that changed my life as well. So you bringing that up actually makes a lot of sense right now. But you've lived both ways now. You've lived in self-will. You live in conscious surrender, waking up every morning, making that decision. What does life feel like on the surrender side when you're able to just lean on faith as opposed to trying to control everything? It's got to be freeing to some degree.
Oh, absolutely. So let's dispel some misconceptions, though. Okay,
Yes.
Just because you surrender your life to God doesn't mean that life becomes peachy, right? God doesn't promise to make all your problems go away. He's just with you in the problems, and the difference there is vast. It's like, do you want to walk through the shadow of the valley of death alone or with the good shepherd? Because he leads you to still waters, right? That's the difference, is that suffering is not going to be eliminated. Evil is not going to be eliminated. But God allows us to overcome. Like Jesus said, I have overcome this world. So it's not will we suffer, it's how you suffer. That's the difference now. And we suffer well. We suffer as an example because we have a hope that goes beyond the suffering. We're all going to die. If you didn't know that, I hate to break it to you, but it's coming. And eternity is a lot longer than this speck of frame that we're dealing with now. So how we suffer is now the primary focus.
How did your relationship with God mesh with your journey through diagnosis with PTSD and living with it?
Again, I would be amiss to say that there wasn't this miraculous change, because for me, everything changed. And okay, to be clear, my story is not everybody's story. Okay?
Yes.
So everybody has a different journey, dealing with trauma, etc. It looks different for everyone. Just I personally had a black and white shift, like a cold turkey off button. Now, I don't know if that's the case for everybody else, but I certainly advocate a relationship with Jesus because of it, because that is what I experienced, right? Yeah. This is what I witnessed with my own life. It was just like an off switch. To that point, right? I went from struggling with all this stuff to within a couple months of like getting back into church and cleaning my life up, I went back. I went back as a private military contractor. I ended up going back like 9 times.
Well, and how about in combat? Did your relationship, at this point when you went back, you had now had this experience, this white light experience that basically, definitionally it would be called. And then now you're surrounded by something bigger than yourself.
Mm-hmm.
How was your time in combat different then, as well as being a police officer for that matter in Southern California?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that when your eyes get off of like your inner navel gazing, it's amazing the suffering that you see around you. For me, being able to be back in that environment for the first time as a real Christian, I for the first time saw how much hurt there was going on around me, right? Like other guys and struggles and not being or acting, when you're really young, you feel that peer pressure to like get along and act like everyone else. Well, going back, I think as a more mature individual was the first time that I was in an environment where my eyes weren't on myself. And it's amazing. We ended up having I was at a small regional embassy office about 90 miles south of Baghdad on the Euphrates River, right across the street from the ruins of Babylon. This is like maybe dirt that Daniel might have walked on and, picked up rocks. And we started a Bible study on Wednesday nights in the middle of all this. And it was just a radically different experience for me, radically different. Even my perspective on death for the believer, it's like, death, where is your sting? There's no, we're not afraid to die. So it changed everything about my experience.
Well, could you compare this to an experience in combat when you hadn't yet surrendered to God? What was the difference when you were now as a private contractor versus when you were a medic with the toothbrush in the van?
Well, to be clear, right, very different times. I just want to put that out there. When I was contracting, it was defensive, right, high threat diplomatic security protection work. When I was there in all of 2005, it was a bit heavier stuff going on, at least where I was, okay, just to be clear. So let me go back to that, okay? So this is back midway through our time, 2005, okay? This is still teenage me. We've had that initial attack. We lost those guys. One day I'm on QRF, which is Quick Reaction Force. So I'm at the FOB, the Forward Operating Base, on standby to respond in the event of an attack, okay? Which there was all the time. So I have my medic stuff, my gear, and radio goes off and there's an attack and it's actively occurring. And we're not too far, I'm like 2 clicks away. So we get in the QRF vehicles, the Humvees, and we start motoring over there. Now, this is an area called Kadamiya Market in downtown Baghdad. It's a heavily congested outdoor market, tons of civilians selling stuff. Our guys were on their way back from a mission, trying to get through the market. And Al-Qaeda, specifically Al-Qaeda, had launched this attack. There was other groups. There was like Al-Sadr City guys, insurgencies, local guys. But Al-Qaeda did the big ones. They had the resources, the training. And they decided, for maximum effect, to launch this attack in the middle of this crowded market. They wanted maximum casualties, right? And they didn't care. They were killing Muslims more than they were killing gringos over there. So our guys are kind of trying to make their way through the market. It's very crowded. And this white Opel, I believe, which is a brand of car, pulls out of an alleyway. Driver's hands are duct taped to the steering wheel. Like he's going, right? He drives straight at the front of the convoy. The gunner in front is Carrasquillo. And he starts lighting up into this vehicle as it approaches with I think he had a 50 cal. To no effect, the guy's coming, he's taped, and it detonates. Boom, car bomb, right? Kills like 50 plus people immediately in the market. Carrasquillo's down, second vehicle's down, and then gunfire and RPGs from the rooftops around. So it was a complex attack, right?
Yeah.
So I'm arriving as this complex attack is occurring. So there's gunfire coming down from the tops. I'm hearing them scream for medic, doc. I get out of the car. I actually tripped and like busted my shoulder up with the bag on top of me. Getting out. I didn't even realize it because your adrenaline's going, right? But there's this little lip on a Humvee. Whoever designed them, I would love to meet them someday. I fell out of it, got up, and I'm running through the marketplace. And this is so vivid in my mind still. There's just bodies everywhere. People on fire and body parts and legs, and people are alive still. Some of them are on fire. Some of them are dead. And I'm jumping over them, trying to reach where our guys were. And I get there and everything's super chaotic, right? Everybody's like, we got to get out of here because we didn't know. As the attack is sort of like dying down, you don't really know who's left, who's there. And I run up to that front vehicle and somebody's screaming for a medic. We don't know that we see the gunner's down, that guy in the first vehicle, right? Carrasquillo. So I open the door, and the vehicles are armored. So the driver is alive, and he's out. And just the gunner's down. And these gun turrets had these harnesses that you would like be able to rest your body weight in, kind of sit in, but still be up above. So he's like seated in this harness, and he's kind of hunched over to the left. Well, from the right side, I see the right side of his face, and it just looks like he's kind of passed out, which is not uncommon with blast, that you get concussions and knocked out. So I'm screaming at him, Carrasquillo, like I want him to get out of the car because we want to leave. And I reach in and I grab him with both of my hands and I pull him towards me. And when he falls kind of like onto me. His head rolls over and I see that half of his head is gone. And it's just an empty cavity. The brain's gone, but it's pooled full of blood. And so all the blood kind of spills onto my shirt and goes down my pants and my legs. And it's like the whole world just froze for a minute, like literally. I didn't know what to like think. It was just like, what, And then
it was just something you didn't think was like a possibility.
Yeah, I did not expect that. I mean, I fully thought that he was alive. So we drag him out, and actually, my first sergeant, or one of the first sergeants, was there, and he's like, "Doc, we got to go, man." He's kind of trying to shake me out of it. We grab his body, and we pull him. I'm like at his head, and I pull him up into the back of the Hummer. It's a medical Humvee, right? So it's got a box on the back. I pull him up into the back, and this all happens so fast. And he kind of like, I land hard, and he kind of sits on my chest, and then the doors close, and it's like dark, and there's just like a little light, and I hear all the noise outside, and we're heading back, right? It's like 135 degrees in the back of this ambulance. And then it's just quiet. And I remember vividly the feel of his hair in my hands, because he had like curly hair. And I remember like the way it felt in my hand. So we drive, it's a short drive back to the combat support hospital. There's a team waiting, and they just have body bags, right? Because he's done. And we pull him out, and I remember the feel of his hair was the last thing I touched as they carry him away. And then that's about 6 months in. That's the first time that I felt like it broke me. Like I went over to a wall. There's all kinds of people walking around. It's like the entrance to the hospital. There's a base over here, but no one was with me. I don't know where the driver went, if he went to get like something to drink or something. But I was just by myself, and that was the first time that I cried that deployment. And I didn't even know what was happening. I just was like, remember I told you at first I thought I might die? At this point I thought I'm gonna die here.
So there was that shift that did take place there.
For sure.
And this was nothing, you couldn't even compare this to when you were a contractor, the levels of violence and brutality that you saw.
No.
Okay.
No, not that it didn't occur.
Yeah.
But there wasn't any hope there, right? At the time, I was not walking with God. I was living for myself. I was drowning all of my issues in just culture and the way we wanted to live. And I was so far from God at that time. It's like the prodigal son story, right? I was out with the pigs at that time, so to say, like the story goes, just eating the slop. And I didn't think to turn to God at that time. And it was just like despair, despair. Now, I went on to see a lot of violence later on in my life, right? Later going back as a contractor, then after that into law enforcement, I saw more violence in law enforcement than I did, I think, in the military. I mean, answering 25 911 calls per day in Southern California is a busy place to be a cop. Murders, rapes, suicides, horrible things. But nothing was like that combat deployment. And I attribute that mostly to the lack of hope and despair that I bore. I needed to grow up a lot,
So now that you had found your relationship with the God of your understanding, and you are walking with him, so to speak, the idea of having to like make a decision to turn your life and will over to something, for people who are trying to get better, it seems almost like a universal principle of advancing someone's life. But surrendering your life to God's care actually, in a way, expands your freedom and creativity, at least in my experience, rather than restricting it. And it's kind of like the idea of it's paradoxical, where you can only keep what you have by giving it away. We had a previous guest on the show who said, make your decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of God is kind of like going to your parents and saying, hey, you can be my parents now. It's like he's already our creator. And but I think a lot of listeners, simultaneously will think to themselves, and they'll hear what we're talking about right now, and it's just like, oh, that's just giving up. It's, I don't want some higher power to come in my life and tell me what to do, because I do think that people, to some degree, really just push back against accountability and responsibility in general.
Yeah. I laugh at people when they say that.
Oh, yeah?
It's ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, you're surrendering to something. So what are you saying, that you're God, I'd love to have that conversation with anyone that says that. I mean, I know they do, right?
Yeah.
It's just not as deep or as philosophical as they think. Whenever I hear people say that, I'm just like, okay, bro. Yeah. Remember, Chesterton said it's not a lack of evidence. So that whole line of thinking of like it's a crutch and this and that, those to me end up being the weakest, right? And not to mention, right? Look at the effects that has had on Western civilization, right? Progressive Marxism and the Stalinists pushed religion as opium of the masses, right? It's the crutch, etc. How has that worked out? Mass murder on a biblical scale. More people died in the 20th century alone than in previous 19th centuries combined. That is the result of making government God, or making man God. You replace reality with this false human-centered utopia, and all you get is death. It happens on an individual level, like we're discussing. But just imagine. You don't have to imagine. Look at history. Look at what happens when you adopt that line of thinking on a mass level or on a government scale. Right? Yeah. It's death and destruction, unprecedented, like the world has never seen until we had this age of rationalism, so-called, right, where we got rid of the notion of a higher accountability.
I love that. It's something just on a personal note. I always think to myself, I go, it's such a misnomer, kind of like Build Back Better, Inflation Reduction. Mm-hmm. Rationalism. Oh, we're going to become rational, but in reality, we're going to be actually discounting everything that does make more sense and have evidence to back it up. But have you ever had a time where, when you surrendered and you were now living in God's will, you actually felt that God's will was worse than what your personal decision would have been?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It didn't end up that way, but you feel that way. And emotions are highly deceptive. Emotions are like the worst thing ever. I mean, they're good, right?
I happen to agree.
They're good, right? Emotions are good indicators, and we need to feel empathy and the good side of emotions. But emotions are wildly deceptive, right? The Bible says that the heart of man is desperately wicked. It'll get you. You cannot make decisions on how you feel, right? What was it? Ben Shapiro, what does he say? Facts don't care about your feelings, right? Well, God said that a long time before Ben did, but it's true. Reality cannot be determined by the way you feel about it. It doesn't matter how you feel about things. And so to answer your question directly, yeah, sometimes I'm grateful that God led me down a road that I didn't want to go down, because I would have never learned the lessons that I learned. There's a guy, great guy, I just started listening to recently, an artist named Ben Fuller. Struggled with substance abuse for a long time. Recently became a Christian. He's out in Tennessee playing country music, and he just wrote a song with Carrie Underwood. And it's literally about that, about how thankful he is that God took him down roads that he never would have wanted to go down, because it led him to blessings that he would have never seen. And that is 100% true in my life, like repeatedly.
Yeah. So as we start to kind of wind this down, I think to myself, everybody struggles with this to some degree. I think we've established that so far, that, people living in an age where we're told individualism as opposed to, to at least some degree being able to give yourself over to and live in, God, a lot of people say, God forbid you be part of a community like a church nowadays, because there's all the evils of that go along. But what would you say to somebody who is at this moment where they're teetering on turning their life over, or at least attempting to do so? Because it's a lifelong process to actually turn your will over. But it was standing kind of at the precipice of this, and like in the dark morass right now. What is your piece of advice to kind of give them that extra boost to just say, you know what, let's try this?
Do it. Do it. As the psalmist said, taste and see the Lord is good. Take that step and do it. I dare you. And you know what? There is wisdom in a multitude of counselors. Surround yourself with like-minded people who are going to strengthen and hold you accountable. If you're around a bunch of yes men and people that tell you whatever you want to hear, get out of there. Until you're strong enough to come back and be in that environment without being effective, you got to get out of that. Okay. Get some accountability and do it. Just taste and see. I don't want to ever hear someone tell me that they don't want to do this or that if they haven't tried it, right? It's kind of like what you were alluding to earlier. Like, just do it. You won't be disappointed.
And finally, last question. In one sentence, because I think we both agree on the underlying principle of this, but why is a fulfilled life impossible without surrendering and making a decision?
There's a story in the New Testament in John chapter 4 where Jesus is speaking to a woman at the well. She's a Samaritan woman. This is the southern part of Israel at the time, kingdom. They were not allowed to go to the temple. She is kind of she's an interesting case because when Jesus asks her about her husband and she says, I don't have one, and he says, what you've said is true because you've had 5 and the one you're with now is not your husband. It just rocks her world because he speaks right to the things that she had done. The issue of her is that she tells him, like, well, I'm not allowed to go to the temple. I can't go worship. I'm a Samaritan woman. I'm sinful, all this stuff. And he says, look, the time is now that God is looking for those to worship in spirit and in truth. Those two things are really important because if you think that you're going to approach God on your own or outside reality by some invented version of him, you're going to be really disappointed. There is a standard of justice. Truth can be found, and truth is absolute. It's not dependent on how you feel about it. And if that's true, if there is a theistic God and he's knowable, then maybe we should listen to what he says. Otherwise, we risk the justice, right? And we want God to be just. We want it for other people. Well, it's coming for us as well. So that was longer than one sentence, but that's my answer.
Well, Josiah, I appreciate you coming by today and talking with us. It's I think one of the most, if not the most, straightforward examples of something that could help heal not just people in general, but society. I'm obsessed with trying to help bring people up from a place of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization, as I've been told and experienced myself. And your words today, I think, shine light on the fact that, yes, while you talk about your faith a lot, people just have to be willing to kick the door a little bit open to the possibility that, like, listen, I can make a decision and find something bigger than myself. And through that, I can achieve a happy, joyous, and free life. So I appreciate you coming by today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.